the second half of the 15th century, a perfidious king was crowned in France. But his throne was threatened. Battles were being prepared. From England to Austria, throughout Europe, marriages were arranged, but one enemy would prove more formidable than the others. The Kingdom of France would have a hard time retaining its power. On August 15, 1461, beneath the great vaulted roof of Reims Cathedral, where all the kings of France had been crowned since the 9th century, the Dauphin Louis de Valois was crowned Louis XI. At 38 years old, it was hard for him to conceal his pride, for he had always been impatient to reign. "20 years earlier, Louis had tried to overthrow his father, Charles VII, determined to take his place on the throne of France.
You are no longer worthy of the Kingdom of France. And you dare to show yourself with this harlot?
In those days, he was ashamed of his father, Charles VII. He thought him more inclined towards the pleasures of the court than for war against the enemies of the kingdom. Charles appeared everywhere with his favorite, the beautiful Agnès Sorel.
Cease this foolishness immediately. Do not take the risk of losing the throne before you've even been crowned.
But Charles VII would not be intimidated. The arrogant Dauphin was finally forced to ask the king's pardon. This challenge, that history has labeled the Praguerie, is remembered as a failed coup d'etat. Louis XI was spared, but as a reprisal, one of the revolt's leaders was put to death. He was tied up in a sack and thrown alive into the river. From this error of his youth, Louis XI would always remain fearful of plots against him. More than 20 years after this revolt, on the day of his coronation, many of the great lords attending feared this new king. Because everyone there had always taken the father's side against the son.
May the messenger of God and of men make you the mediator of the clergy and the people.
When the coronation was over, many of the nobility threw themselves at his feet, trying to get into his good graces. But Louis XI made no promises. Barely had he been crowned, then he made some decisions that were to surprise them. The new king decided to remove the nobles from power and surround himself with common people. This was betrayal for his ministers, all born into the nobility and who had faithfully served his father.
Come, my friend. Take your place.
At the first council, they reacted violently against a newcomer.
I shall decide who sits among us.
Louis XI decided to remove his enemies from power. In their places, he put friends in the key posts of the kingdom.
The barber will sit at the council.
His barber became an ambassador, his tailor a herald of arms, and his doctor a chancellor. For Louis had learned to trust the common people, where he grew up at the Château de Loches in Touraine. His father, King Charles VII, had wanted his son to spend his childhood here, far away from the court at Bourges, in order to protect him from the English, who still occupied a large part of France. The Dauphin's upbringing was entrusted to nurses and tutors. He was a pious child who was given a well-rounded education. But his solitude and the rather austere atmosphere at court turned him into a secretive prince, sometimes cruel and already distrustful.
Turn round. Faster. Turn again. Arm again. Arm again. Arm.
Louis would turn the chateau of his childhood into a prison where prisoners were locked in iron cages. Because once crowned, he would mistrust everyone. Particularly the King of England, Edward IV of York, who could very easily have restarted the 100 Years' War. This courageous warrior had taken the English throne by force and had not given up the hope of wearing the crown of France. But Louis XI was equally suspicious of the nobility of France, whose fiefs split up the kingdom, such as Brittany, the Maine, Anjou, the Orléanais, and Burgundy. Rather than wage war against them, the universal spider, as he was already known, was to play the marriage game. To control the towns of Orléans and Blois, Louis XI married his second daughter, Jeanne de France, to young Louis d'Orléans, who was only 14 years old. The 12-year-old princess was not ugly, but she had been deformed and lame. When Mary de Clèves, the young groom's mother, saw her, she almost fainted. But the marriage took place. But this marriage game was soon to turn against the King of France. Many thought that Louis XI was leading France to its downfall, beginning with his younger brother, Charles de France. In February 1465, during a royal hunt, he slipped away. He had a secret meeting in Paris. Like him, the Dukes of Brittany, Bourbon, Lorraine, and others had been removed from power by Louis XI. To avenge themselves, they formed a movement known as the League for the Public Weal. At the head of this revolt was the son of the Duke of Burgundy, soon to be known as Charles the Bold.
My dear friends, the kingdom is being driven into the ground.
Like Louis XI, Charles the Bold descended from a king of France, John II the Good. They were first cousins and had the same determination to fight.
With this pledge, let it be known that we, princes of the blood, barons, and
The Bold was intelligent, proud, and brutal,
our forces,
and like all lords of the League, was ready to do anything to overthrow Louis XI.
we pledge to seat a just man on the throne of France.
His idea was to appoint the king's younger brother, Charles de France, as regent.
Let us swear, my friends. We swear!
In the name of the League of the Wheel, the Bold declared war on the King of France. On May the 10th, 1465, with more than 10,000 men, he headed towards Paris. Immediately, Louis XI left Tours with an army of around 7,000 soldiers. On the evening of July the 15th, the two sides met at Montlhéry.
Archers! Forward!
The following day at dawn, Louis gave the order to attack. The battle was very disorganized. It was total chaos. The Burgundians penetrated the French ranks. The royal army pretended to retreat and then dispersed. By the middle of the morning, the battle had started up again in small skirmishing groups. Louis XI was himself attacked by a warrior nicknamed the Great Bastard of Burgundy, half-brother of the Bold. Louis XI was wounded and fell to the ground. Believing himself victorious, Charles the Bold went to take possession of the Chateau of Montlhéry. Suddenly, he was attacked by the king's men. His equerry was killed outright. The Bold was wounded in the throat, but managed to escape.
Sire! 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 Sire!
On the battlefield, the king's soldiers rushed to Louis XI, who lay on the ground.
God has spared me.
The king was safe, but both the French and Burgundian armies were exhausted and withdrew. More than 2,000 men on each side had lost their lives. No one really knew who had won the Battle of Montlhéry. Both sides claimed victory. Louis XI returned to Paris. But his enemies did not give up. With other lords of the League, the Bold besieged the capital, hoping to weaken the king. But the monarch waited patiently for the coalition troops to become exhausted and starved, before he agreed to negotiate. After about 3 weeks of siege, Louis XI, almost unescorted, met the Bold at Conflans. The king did not underestimate his enemy.
My cousin.
My cousin.
I know you are a gentleman of the House of France.
A skilled strategist, he started by flattering the Bold.
I have not forgotten that we were once allies. In return, I will reward you by granting you that which you have asked.
Louis XI granted fiefs to his enemies. To his brother went Normandy, to the Bold the towns of the Somme and the county of Boulogne in Picardy. The king knew that the Treaty of Conflans would stir up discord among the coalition. And he was right. Barely a month later, some dukes grew envious of the territories that others had received. The League of the Public Weal shattered, and Louis quickly retook Normandy and wanted to win back the towns in the Somme that had been given to the Bold. But rather than to go to war again, the enemies decided to negotiate. On October 9th, 1468, the King of France, responding to Charles the Bold's invitation, arrived at the chateau of Péronne in Picardy.
Agreed. All this part will remain with the forest of Coulet.
For 5 days, the King of France and the Duke of Burgundy argued bitterly.
So, let us agree to keep this part upstream.
Eventually, they managed to agree to the terms of the Treaty of Péronne. By way of agreement, they both swore on the cross.
Neither of us will go to war with the other, nor covet the other's lands or subjects.
The borders are clearly defined.
The ink on the Treaty of Péronne was hardly dry before Charles the Bold learned he had already been betrayed. He soon received a message informing him that the town of Liège, one of his fiefs, was in full revolt. While he was making a pact with Louis XI, the king had sent agents to Flanders in the Bold's territory to stir up a rebellion.
Traitor! Arrest that man!
The Bold immediately wanted to make Louis XI pay for his betrayal. He closed all the gates of Péronne and doubled the guard. Louis XI was a prisoner and had to follow the Duke of Burgundy and his army to Liège. On October the 27th, 1468, the Bold's army besieged the city of Liège. Louis XI, held prisoner, had to watch the destruction of the city which had risen up for him. Over 4 days, 4,000 Liégeois were put to the sword. When the massacre was over, Louis XI went home, where more bad news awaited him.